Hey, welcome and good afternoon, friends. Hope that you are doing well. What is good for you today? Coming to you here to talk about and talk with a fascinating person that I very briefly met a few months ago at a work event. And I want to just share briefly about that because I walked away and I missed the opportunity. And I realized it later. But my guest today, I briefly met standing over a food buffet line at a work event. And my focus at that moment, even while exchanging pleasantries, was to get food and get back to my table. I was hungry and I'll admit that I was feeling a little bit introverted and really wasn't looking for small talk in that moment. And then come to realize later, the person that I was standing there with, it has a fascinating story about helping people here in Colorado and across Latin America. And I wanted to share that conversation with you, bring her on today. My loss in that moment is your gain today. And so joining me here in a moment is Robin Waterman, who does work in the greater Aurora, has been doing work in the greater Aurora area across Colorado, and like I said, in Latin America, Central America, helping people, helping immigrants, particularly here in our state. And I want to have her on here to share about her story and the work that she's been doing helping folks. So that's the plan for today, and welcome to my live stream, Mile High Live. Welcome. Thank you for hanging out with me here for a few minutes, folks. I'm Aaron Johnson, and I'm coming to you here from Castle Rock, and would love to know where you're coming from across the state, or if you're from outside of Colorado, welcome as well, and would love to know where you're watching from. My goal here with this show is to provide positive posts on social media. And, earlier this week, we found out the importance of that because, well, Facebook, it was announced that they elevate negative posts 5 times more than positive posts in their platform. We need more positive things, I think, on social media, more positive content. And I do that by bringing on folks, connecting you with people across Colorado who help elevate our state, who are rolling up their sleeves and who are doing the hard work to help out neighbors in our community. So that's the plan here. My guest today is Robin Waterman. She is the founder of a community-based nonprofit organization in the Aurora area, and it's called Aurora Community Connection. And she's done a lot of work there and across her state and across the world to help out immigrants here in the U.S. and people in Central America and Latin America. And I've asked her to come on and share about her experiences, the work that she's been doing in helping people, and just, provide us some insights that might not otherwise get. So with that, I won't delay anymore, and I'll bring on Robin. Good afternoon. How are you doing, Robin?
Good afternoon, Aaron. I'm doing great. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much. So, just a little bit of technical issues on my end, but, no big deal. We'll get through it. So
Okay.
pushing fat finger in some buttons. That's all. So thank you for coming on and hanging out with me. Like I said, briefly met at a work event a few months ago, and I introduced myself, but I walked away and I missed the opportunity to talk with you. And I heard from a coworker later about the work that you do, and I thought, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Like, I was just so interested in getting back to my table. I missed a real opportunity. So I wanted to bring you on, and I really appreciate you spending a little bit of time in coordinating with me and coming on here this afternoon to share about the work that you've been doing. And I hope I encapsulated that correctly, but please feel free to, as we discussed, share exactly what you've been doing. So with that, just briefly, share a little bit about yourself and briefly, the work that you do.
Okay,
And
well,
then we'll
thanks,
dive in
Aaron.
from
Yeah,
there.
and you captured it pretty well. But so I've done, I suppose, a lot of different kind of work throughout my life. But I think one thing that does capture it is to say that ever since I graduated from college, when I first graduated from college, I started living and working among poor families in the United States, and I started in St. Louis,
Mm,
Missouri, and I remember right away that year feeling that I'd found my life's work. And so ever since then, I've done work that connects me with families who live in poverty. And I focus on education, and then most recently focus on access to education and access to health. And so I did that work in St. Louis, but I came to Colorado a few years later as part of a full-time volunteer program, kind of like the Peace Corps. And I lived and
okay.
worked in Five Points actually
Wow.
for 6 years. And I worked for an agency that provided dignified housing to low-income families, and I created education programs for those families. And then went on from there to get my master's and later a doctorate. And ever since then, I've been working with families, very, very poor families in Central America and Mexico, as you described. So that's rural poverty where people
Mm,
don't have clean drinking water, they don't have electricity, they don't have access to education beyond very basic primary education. Um, and then I've worked with Spanish speaking immigrants here in the Denver and Aurora community ever since I came back from Central America. So, and as you well captured, after getting my doctorate, I was looking for a job, and actually just it was kind of like I was like in a food line, just like you actually. I was in a food line getting a burrito, and I bumped into a man who said that there had been a family resource center in Aurora serving Spanish-speaking families that had closed, and that there were some funders interested in reopening it. And I said, I'm the woman for you. And so I worked together with the leadership program through the Chamber of Commerce in Aurora and
okay.
started Aurora Community Connection Family Resource Center 14 years ago.
Wow.
So
Okay. See, folks, good things happen in food lines. Don't be so rushed to get away. Learn from me. Okay, so let's, I guess, start back. You went to college, but you're leaving off where you went to college. And I think there's a real dichotomy here from where you went to college and that experience to winding up in inner city St. Louis. Can you share about your college experience?
yeah, I mean, I went to Bates College up in Maine, and then I
Okay,
was privileged to get my graduate degrees from Harvard. So, um, and and that is some of the things I'm the most proud of, actually, especially after I got
good.
my master's in education from Harvard. I decided that I don't have money to share, but I have the privilege of my education, and I
Right.
went to El Salvador and I worked with people who never had the opportunity to receive education at all. And so I helped poor families, poor adults actually in El Salvador who didn't know how to even read and write because they'd never been able to go to school because of such extreme poverty. And so I think that is one of the things I'm most proud of in my life is that I took my Harvard degree and I used it to try and
Okay.
help train poor women. I actually trained women who had an elementary school education to become literacy teachers in the entire region in El Salvador. So I helped bring out their capacity to help those who had even less than them learn how to read
Wow.
and write in the most basic of ways. So
Okay. That's great. Are you from the Northeast area, Maine,
I
or what
am.
is? Okay, gotcha.
Hmm.
Good. And so then going from college campus to St. Louis, like you say, you didn't have the money to be able to provide in whether it was in St. Louis or beyond. But if one thing you hear from pastors, there's different ways to give. You can give with your money, and of course, churches always love that. But you can also give with your time, right? And so, when you're young and you don't have a lot of money, a lot of experience, but you have time and you have energy to give. So, what was your impression then? I guess when you arrived in St. Louis from the somewhat idyllic campus, spending time in college to that, and what were your impressions? What opened your eyes then in that first job?
Yeah, it's interesting. I so that actually first job was a faith-based program, so it was a faith-based volunteer program, and one of the things that even led me to that was that growing up in my family, I grew up Catholic, and my parents taught me the most basic concept is that God has a special concern for families in poverty, and
Sure.
that's important to us. And so similar to what you're getting at, Aaron, is that I decided, hey, I had this privileged education, and I studied hard, and I loved school, but I felt like, hey, I've given 4 years of my life to nurturing my own intelligence, and now actually my initial idea is that I wanted to give of my time to living out my faith, and but then my world broke open from there because I learned something there that continues to resonate now,
And what
35
was that?
years later, is that I think that God is inside all of us, and that the way God works is that when we give of ourselves in a way that's aligned with what God wants in the world, God fills us up abundantly. And so I had the most amazing joy, even though I was living in very, basic conditions. I received a stipend of $20 a month, and we
Wow.
got food and a place to live, and but I was really happy, and I felt like I found my life's vocation, and that is a thread that has never diminished. Is that because when I even think about why do I do this, I mean, part of what I could say is, well, my faith has guided that, but as I thought about that, is that it's not just an intellectual theology, it's not just a motivational theology, it's actually how the wiring of my heart now is that when I give of myself and I do something that I think is good and caring of others, it fills me up. And there's nothing else. I recently resigned as executive director. Just decided I want a job that wasn't quite so consuming and demanding. And I have a doctor from Harvard, and there are a lot of jobs available to me that could pay 3 or 4 times what I was
I'm
earning
sure.
before. And you know what? I decided I don't want any of them, and I'm now taking a job, and I'm going to work with a faith-based agency that helps families in poverty in Haiti and Central America have clean drinking water, and I'm going to earn even less than I was earning last time. And it's interesting to me is that this kind of work just it's just how I'm wired now, I suppose. And I think it's because I believe that that's how God works in the world, is that we are filled up when we're doing good for others in ways that money
Hmm.
can never even come close to touching.
Thank you. Um, and I want to get into your work here in the Aurora area and the organization that you started, and we'll get there. But a little bit more about your background and the road that led you to that, I guess. So when you're in St. Louis, then you're working in the inner city, right? Did I get that
Hmm.
right? Yep. Um, at that time, then, did you know that you wanted to work then in Latin America, or was that something that came later? Did you know then that you wanted to go pursue your master's and your doctorate and go to a place like Harvard, or where were you thinking about going next from that point?
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. When I was in St. Louis, I worked in a Catholic church that was in the inner city, and
Okay.
a priest took me to this place where they celebrated mass, and it was actually in a homeless shelter.
Mm-hmm.
So people who were homeless as well as other people gathered, and there were several women there. There was a lawyer and a doctor actually who had been living and working in El Salvador, and I was so inspired by them. It's just like it just blows the paradigm of the world wide open, right? Is that we grow up in a society that says if you're a lawyer, you become a lawyer and doctor, so you can be rich and have a second home and have a lot of nice cars and enormous privilege. And so these women really inspired me. And then I also saw a documentary about a young woman named Jean Donovan, who was a layperson who was working in Central America
Okay.
and just gave her life to that work. And she was eventually killed, actually. And but I don't know. So it touched my heart. But I think there must be something about who we're created to be even before we come out of the womb or something, because we're all exposed to lots of different inspirational people, right? But I decided then that I want to go to Central America someday. And then when I came to Denver and I worked for Hope Communities, I'm young, I'm 1 year out of college, and I'm creating this literacy program from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
And so I eventually said, I need to get some training in education
Okay.
because I had assessed that there was a real need for educational support for people in poverty, even in the United States. And so at that juncture, I decided to get my master's in education. And after that, that's when I felt like I was ready to go live in a foreign country, because before that, I think I felt like I was not ready. I was just felt too young to have to, learn a second language and be somewhere where I didn't know anyone. And so I was 30 years old, 33 actually, by the time I got my master's and decided to go to Central America. So I spent 6 years in Five Points and lived in that community. There was a soup kitchen right next to my house, and the families I worked with were all my neighbors. And that was part of the faith community the faith community I prayed with was right next door. It was a shelter that was right next door. And that was part of their belief, and it's been a formational belief for me ever since then. Is personal relationship with people in poverty helps shape how we think, how we care, what our values are. It kind of helps, I guess, give us perspective so that we don't take too much for granted, I suppose. And but the flip side is that it fills me up too.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's not cliche to say that many times the poorest of the families I know are the most generous with their food, with their time, with whatever they have. And so I continue to really grow so much and be transformed by my relationships with my neighbors. So that was a powerful time in my life. And then I got my master's, and then it was like, okay, well, I'd left my job. I'd actually just ended a relationship. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe now's the time to go to Central America. And so I started learning a little bit of Spanish and
Okay.
took some more classes. And I went to Mexico first for a year in Mexico and then 2 years in El Salvador.
Okay. And what period of time was that? Like the 90s?
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
question. Actually, when I went to El Salvador, it was the early 90s and the peace
Okay.
accords had just been signed. So actually, when I was visiting to decide where I was going to work and what work I was doing, there were still military checkpoints, which was a little scary. But the peace accords had been signed, and the implementation was actually pretty faithful. And I never felt unsafe. And in fact, actually, I lived in a house with the mud house actually, and there was barely a door on it, and I never had a pencil taken. I never once felt physically unsafe. And my neighbors, that's part of actually what I felt in Five Points too, is I lived in what people might have thought was a dangerous community, but people care for you. If you show that you love them and that you are in relationship with them, they watch out for you and care for you. And I never had my car broken into in Five Points, nothing ever. And in Central America, never once did I feel unsafe. And my neighbors took care of me. They brought me food every day, and so yeah. So it was the early 90s.
I think that's the key that you just said, is being in relationship with them, right? So you're talking about Five Points, and when people mention that area or the Rhino District now, those areas of Denver that, I grew up on the Front Range, And those were just areas you didn't go to, unless you
Right.
were from there. Like you just stay away.
Mm-hmm.
And now there, or there is a perception at least, stay away, right?
Right.
And now people are flocking to move into those areas. There's trendy shops and condos and apartments and housing that is opening up in there. And it's a very different environment than what it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And, the point that where you were in there working. So,
Yeah.
and I have no idea of, what the world is like when you were down in Mexico or in El Salvador. I mean, that is completely foreign to me. Like I said, I grew up here in Colorado, and I spent time in the East Coast, in the DC and Virginia area. So that's, and this discussion really is, you and I chatted before, it's very foreign to me. But I'm curious, in learning about your experience and your pathway and the work that you've been doing, and sharing that with folks, because I think there's a lot of people that don't have an understanding of what that world is, and we have this big policy discussion. Trigger warning for anybody watching. We're not talking about the border here and what's going on there, right? Like that's another conversation. There's a million and one places to go to have that sort of conversation. But what I want to do is have a different conversation today, about helping immigrants. And Robin, you're a leader in that here in our state, and learning from your experiences and where your heart is at. And so anyways, that's, I guess, my long-winded way of saying this is all very different to me. We wind up getting stuck in this rut, of talking when it comes to the issue of immigration, not so much about the immigrants and the people who are in our community, but about these other policy issues that we hear about, and it's like, we can only talk about it in that framework, and there's a whole other framework to have that conversation in. So I appreciate you sharing about that. So you're down there, El Salvador, trying time, as far as as you say, peace accords are signed. Security is a little bit of an issue, but things are stable, which is good. I guess don't know, from there, like, how long were you down there, and can you share a little bit about the work that you did then, why you were down there, and then we'll use that to set up, the work that you're doing here in Colorado.
Yeah, sure. So I was down there for a combined 3 years. Actually, I was 1 year in rural Mexico, and then 2 years in El Salvador, um, and there was a group of women down there who had determined that literacy was one of the major needs for the country, and I had just gotten
Mm.
my master's in literacy. So, and I had spent the year in Mexico, so I was fluent in Spanish by that time, both reading and writing, and speaking Spanish. And so what I did is I trained local women from throughout a large region called Cuscatlan. I trained local women who had at least elementary school education. I trained them to be literacy teachers. And
Okay.
I helped develop literacy curriculum. There was some existing curriculum, but I worked with teams of Salvadoran people to improve on that curriculum, to develop that curriculum. And then, I trained, we had monthly meetings, and then to train the teachers. And then I would actually go around and just to kind of describe, I lived in this community. I had to walk 45 minutes just to get out of the community.
Hmm.
There was no paved road, no cars, no bus, nothing.
Wow.
Walked 45 minutes, and then I would get out to the main road and take a bus, and then walk another half an hour to get into the community, where I was observing a literacy class. But I went and observed the literacy classes so that I knew, what were some of the strengths the women had, what were some of the areas I needed to continue to help them with. But the other thing I'm proud of is that my goal was to work myself out of a job.
Mhm.
And it reflects my belief that, just part of a founding belief of Aurora Community Connection, is that that people just need access to resources, and that there's inequitable access to resources in our world, essentially. And so in El Salvador, for example, the women I worked with had access to elementary school education, nothing else. And so I helped work with them to develop their capacities and ultimately worked myself out of a job. And that's when I left. So,
Wonderful. Wow. Good. That's quite an achievement. That's great. So then you came to Colorado, and let's talk then about, maybe skip ahead here, talk a little bit about Aurora Community Connection and the circumstances around your founding of that and how that came about. You mentioned earlier being in a food line and bumping into somebody who expressed the need for such an organization. Was that the organization that you're referring to?
yeah, so
Yeah.
essentially, I got my doctorate, and I'm an avid athlete, and I was swimming in downtown Curtis Park, which is right near Five Points, and I was in line to get a burrito, and bumped into a man who was the director of the Family Resource Center of Association of Colorado, and he told me that they had conducted a substantial evaluation of needs in Aurora and determined that
Mhm.
there was a significant need for services for Spanish-speaking families. That there's, a very strong nonprofit for the Asian community, for example. There's a strong nonprofit that focuses on African American families. There's another nonprofit that focuses on African immigrants, but there was a gap in services for Spanish speakers because there
Interesting.
had been a nonprofit that had existed, and the leadership of that nonprofit, I think, perhaps didn't have sufficient skills around fundraising, or for whatever reasons, the nonprofit folded. And so there was an existing gap in services. Well, I had been, during my doctoral work, I had worked with Spanish speaking leaders in Aurora Public Schools. So I had established a network of community leaders within Aurora. And so I actually applied to they have a leadership class within the Chamber of Commerce of Denver and Aurora, and I applied to be their project. And I said, hey, take on my project. I want to start a new nonprofit that provides services to Spanish speaking families in Aurora. And so they selected me. So all of a sudden I had,
Wow.
15 smart, capable professionals who had a project to help me. And so 6 months later, we opened, or 8 months later, something like that, we opened what we called Aurora Community Connection Family Resource Center. We were sponsored in part by the Family Resource Center Association, so we became a new member of that association. So I had infrastructure support through the Family Resource Center Association, and but one thing, Aaron, that's kind of interesting is that I had this doctorate, and I'm like, oh, like, why? You don't really need a doctorate to start a nonprofit, and it wasn't even all that relevant. But a doctorate does really help you clarify your thinking. And
Mhm.
my doctoral work focused on supporting immigrant families to support their children to be successful in school. And one of the things that I came to through my research is that a lot of immigrant families have, as I discovered in El Salvador, they're smart, they're capable, they have many, many talents and capacities, but they're often underdeveloped because of a lack of access to resources. So
Sure.
I that was kind of my guiding premise. So the two things that guided the framework of the Aurora Community Connection is that, one, we're going to focus on access to resources, and together with immigrant leaders, I identified that health and education were the dominant resources that they needed. And then the other thing that I think is really important to share is that I was very, very clear in focusing on what we talk about in academic circles as countering deficit views of low income families. So essentially, many nonprofits approach families as a charity and a need for being taken care of, and
Mm.
and that is, it's an understandable attitude and it's a noble attitude, but what I came to realize over the 4 years that I was doing my doctorate is that actually ultimately cripples people. Is that if you give people handouts, then you cripple them. And so at ACC, a founding principle is that we approach everyone in terms of their strengths and capacities, and we ask things from everyone. So it might sound kind of unusual, but we charge for every single service. Now, that means we charged $5 for a 16-week tutoring program, or or $10 for an English class a parent would take for the entire 4 months or something. But we charge people paid either with money or with their time. And it intersected nicely with the fact that immigrants always say to me, I didn't come to this country to receive a handout or to look for charity. I came to this country because I want a better life for my children. And I guess I can, segue there, and we can kind of flesh out this conversation a little. But when I was in El Salvador and even in Mexico, I just saw people that are suffering from terrible, terrible poverty. I mean, they're just, even the drinking water isn't clean, so they're sick every day, and they don't have access to education. And so they have relatives who are here in the United States, and they say, you know what, if you come here and you work, you can actually get paid even $15 an hour. Your kids can go to school all day, and they'll get lunch at school, and you can have health care. And so that's part of what I try and share with people, is that especially anyone who's a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or uncle, is that, if you saw your children suffering and sometimes dying because of lack of access to medical care or even clean drinking water or healthy food, and someone said to you, hey, if you come here, your children will not only not die, but they'll thrive and they'll get an education. That's why immigrants come. Is they don't come for handouts. They don't come to be taken care of. And in fact, I think there are a few people who would disagree with the fact that immigrants, in fact, work very, very hard. And they come to this country because they want to work hard. And so at Aurora Community Connection, we focused on just giving people access to the amazing resources that exist here in order to help them be stronger for their families. But the other point that I want to say is that I love working with immigrant families because they always want to give back. They don't just think about themselves and their family, but they care about each other, and they want to give back to their communities. And the communities where immigrants exist, any opportunity you offer them to make the community better, they contribute. And I think it must resonate in some ways with the history of the United States, and that we're a country who's built on immigrants, and immigrants came to this country and made it what it is today. And so it was really a beautiful experience for me working with immigrants and Aurora Community Connection. And actually I'm strategizing, and I'm going to keep a part-time project on the side, and I've been offered a couple of different consulting jobs so I can continue to work with those amazing leaders in Aurora, because they touch my life, they touch my heart, they touch my way of viewing the world, that they have so little, but they have so much they want to give back, and they continue to just shape the values of our communities. I can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry. There's a lot to break down from what you had just said there. So to unpack, but going back to what you were saying as far as providing resources for immigrants, you identified healthcare and education. So I would love to learn more why those two. I think there's probably a litany of resources that people need. And I looked before we talked. There's there's what I saw is there's 31 federal programs that qualified immigrants can receive, right? And I think we think a lot of times of just about just the federal program. Well, there's so many benefits that they can get, but you chose those lanes or those segments of resources. Was that because there was a greater need for those, or they weren't getting those from other places, and there's other resources they could get from other organizations? How did you go through that decision process to focus in on education and on healthcare?
Yeah, I think there are two layers to that. So I'll start with the easiest one, is that that health and education reflect the most basic of families' needs. And again, we help people gain access to existing resources. So, like health insurance or health medical care, But also in the arena of health, we offer people exercise programs because we felt like there are a lot of preventable diseases like diabetes
Mm,
actually is if you're Latino, then you're at risk for diabetes just by being born Latino, you know?
mm,
So we spent a lot of time offering cooking and nutrition classes as well as education programs to help people have access to information first and then the opportunities to exercise and eat a nutritional diet. And then education, you know, I think that education is the key to all human progress as well as societal progress, and that can be education in terms of workshops for adults or English classes for adults. But then a core program we have at ACC is a tutoring program to help kids, especially whose parents don't speak English,
mm-hmm.
provide support to the kids for their homework. But I think because of what you said, I also want to offer just another point, Aaron, which I think is, you know, we can kind of get off into the details of it as much as you want, but a reality is that you know there are families here who don't have legal documentation status, and that is a challenge, obviously, that many people grapple with,
Mm-hmm.
and so you know I just want to say that everyone who comes to this country would do anything. They learn English, pay fees, do anything to have legal status. And unfortunately, the spots that are available, especially for someone who comes from Mexico, for example, who doesn't come as a rich person, the slots that are available are extremely limited. And the reason I bring that up is because those families don't get a single federal program. So federal
Right,
programs
right.
are most of the immigrants that I worked with, even if they could, they didn't take any federal services. The only things they received primarily were Medicaid health insurance for their children. And as a parent, I'm sure
Mm,
you understand that if you can get health insurance for your child, you will. But things like food stamps and things like that, most people said, no, you know, I don't need, I'm not going to look for and take any government support that primarily they say we want to work and we'd like to work and take care of our families. And so I find it, you know, I think because you brought up that list of federal programs, I
right.
just want to make that point is
Thank
that
you.
actually that many immigrant families don't look to or receive any government benefits.
That's a great insight, and I appreciate you clarifying that because I think there is a perception, and I'm guilty of that, and a lot of people are guilty of that. Because I think getting back to, I think what I was trying to say earlier, as far as when we think about issues like this, there's certain frameworks that where people's minds go to because we hear about it so much in the mainstream media and social media, but we don't have a real understanding of the what it's like to live that life for folks. So,
Mm-hmm.
no, I appreciate you saying that. Um, yeah, and as far as health care goes, like I can assure you, you're absolutely right. Just over the last couple of weeks, we've had some sick kiddos at our house and some restless nights, and you do anything as a parent to try to help out your kids and
Mm-hmm.
make them comfortable, keep them healthy, get them back to health when they're sick. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's certainly understandable. So at Aurora Community Connection (ACC), can you share about the classes, particularly as I looked online, seeing the cooking class? It looked like there's a lot of intentionality behind that. It wasn't just simply come and learn some recipes. But can you share a little bit about that and the intentionality that your organization that you had created? You've since left. You're not working there now, but the thought process behind creating those programs, and I use the cooking class as an example. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is that I've been a competitive triathlete for most of my life, and so kind of like I was saying about how my experience of God, sort of fills me up and motivates me. I'm not going to compare the two, but I mean, or sort of in degrees, but as an athlete, it's like when I exercise, then I want to eat healthier. And when
Mm.
I exercise and eat a healthy diet, I just feel better. And so, but I also, when I first opened ACC, I created a community advisory board because I firmly believe that community voice needs to guide our work. And so the combination of those things led me to say, yeah, we're going to have a comprehensive approach to health. So, a primary service always has been helping people apply for Medicaid for those who do qualify, and then helping them know how to use their health insurance. But then, not unrelated to that, is we said, yeah, we want to give people access to information about nutrition. Like I was actually with a group of families from ACC just last night,
Mm.
and we were talking about their families who are still in Mexico, and they said, they know nothing about how to prevent diabetes, and one woman talked to me, and this is just one of many examples of an aunt who, died at age 42 from diabetes, and
Wow.
before that she had had limbs that had been amputated because of diabetes. And so there's just basic information that people don't have. And a small example, like there was a mom who talked to me about a year ago, but how she took the nutrition class, and she was struggling with diabetes. And she said, she learned, for example, she said, you can eat the tortilla with the beans or the rice with the beans, but I learned that I can't have the tortilla, the rice, and the beans. And it's simple things like that. And she said, now I don't have diabetes anymore. I'm completely off the diabetes spectrum. And she exercises on a regular basis because we provide Zumba classes at the center, and we provided yoga classes. And so I think we just saw the value, and again, this idea of access to resources and access to information is that, and I mean, I just heard story after story about people even suffering from depression or
Mm.
anxiety, and people who said that they were having to take all this medication to address anxiety, and they started eating a healthier diet because they went to the cooking and nutrition class, and then they attended our exercise classes. And actually, because of my life experience, I created a program where we had like an exercise program, like a Zumba class, and then the cooking class right after that. So
Mm.
people would come for like the entire morning. And the reason I did that is because I know that if you exercise, then you naturally want to eat a healthier diet. So I thought I wanted to just kind of create that holistic experience for people. So they came and they had an hour-long exercise class, and then a cooking and nutrition class. And that class, as you saw, I think maybe on the website, is it talks to people about nutrition, and then gives people recipes, and then actually everyone makes the recipe together, and they taste it and they eat it, and then they get sent home with a
Mm.
bag of groceries so they can replicate that recipe at home. And then one time during the 6-week series, they go to the grocery store together actually, and the teacher helps them read nutrition labels and shop for the most affordable item, and just kind of create that kind of analysis as to affordable food on a budget. But I guess the sort of the bigger answer to your question is just this comprehensive approach. And you might not have seen, but one of the things I'm really proud of is just in the last year, I finally was able to get funding for a mental health therapist. So now we have a
Oh.
bilingual mental health therapist on site. And so again, it's this, interest in a comprehensive approach to health, and recognizing that in some cases, even people's physical health was impacted negatively by issues of mental health. And I'm talking just
Sure.
anxiety and depression and stress. And so so anyway, so I think just the sort of the insight to have kind of a comprehensive, holistic approach to health. That's why we came up with the set of programs that we offer. And then we offer exercise programs for kids and for moms, as well as some for families together, family literacy programs. So those are all also very intentional, because for the Latino community, parents will do anything for their kids. And I know that's true across the US born community as well, but it's particularly compelling with our Latino families. It's just part of who they are, and if you say something's going to be good for their kids, moms will drop anything and everything and come and do it, and so we would have family focused approaches to things, or we would, like during the summer, It was a vibrant, really vibrant time at ACC, as
Hmm.
we'd have an English class for moms, or a parenting support class, but then the kids would have exercise programs, and then we'd have something for the preschool kids. And the center was just full of, hundreds of moms and teens and young kids. And they all came because if it was the whole family could come, then they were there, And if we had just had programs
Sure.
for kids, the attendance probably would have been at half because the moms wouldn't have found it as compelling, But it's like, wait a minute. And we had their teens volunteer. So the teens volunteered as coaches or tutors. And we had something for the 3-year-olds and something for the 7-year-olds. And so everyone came because the Latino families are like, hey, if it's family centered, sign me up.
You're there.
So,
They're there. Yeah. No, it
mhm.
definitely helps to be able to bring everybody and be in one location rather than
Yeah.
crisscrossing town and trying to arrange all that. Like, yeah, what a headache. So, but anyways, yeah, when I saw on the site, just for the cooking class, right? It's not just come and learn how to do a simple recipe and cook healthfully, but is that the right word? Um, but take a bag home, replicate it at home. Show your family what you're doing, but also get more practice in doing it, right? And I just thought,
Hmm.
like, it was very simple, but I think it goes to show that your organization had thought through all of
Hmm.
that and is very intentional in equipping and folks with skills and
Hmm.
giving them opportunity to practice that. So um, I that stood out to me. I know it's simple, but
Yeah, and
it's just
actually, just to tell you, so my
yeah.
my background was adult education, right? It's
Okay.
not education of children, and that is a very central aspect of the philosophy of adult education is that for adults, they learn cognitively, but it needs to be contextualized and authentic purposes. So people are going to learn much more effectively. Like kids kind of are stuck, right? You're a first grader, you go to
Hmm.
school, that's what you do, and you read, and the teacher tells you to read, and you read it. But for adults, you have busy lives, a lot of things going on, you're distracted. And so education is only compelling if it's really applicable to authentic purposes in your life. So I did try and bring that understanding of what can help yield effective change in behavior and change in thinking for adult learners.
Cool. What are the challenges, I guess, now for your area of work? And you're not with ACC any longer, but with your area of work, whether it's there or where you're heading next, what do you think the challenges are today that may be a little bit different from when you started out, when you created the organization 14 years ago, or just even a few years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure, that I have an answer that would exactly say that. I think that one challenge definitely is the issue of legal documentation status, and I am hopeful that we can come to a place where we can find a way to um, come to a comprehensive approach to hold people accountable. But for those who are here in our communities,
Hmm.
give them an opportunity to pay fines, and pass whatever tests need to be taken. I think that having a large number of our current residents not have legal documentation is a major barrier, and I think it's a barrier for our society as well as for individual families. And I do think everyone agrees on that. Just the solution, maybe we don't agree on.
Sure.
Um, so I think that's an ongoing problem. But and it's interesting. I think one other thing, just maybe thinking out loud with you right now, but to kind of name the positive benefit of what you're doing, which I think is wonderful, is that
Okay.
I think personal relationship across difference. So I guess I want to invite all of us, I mean, thanks everyone for listening to this, but invite all of us if we have opportunities to get to know people who are different than us. And I think my experience with immigrants, they're wonderful families. They're caring, they're kind. They want to give back to their communities, and I feel like to the extent that we can help our children and ourselves have a relationship with people who are different than us, because of national origin or skin color or race. I think that actually is a wonderful gesture to help us all be a little bit more whole and kind of work together towards some common goals, because that is one of my goals. Is I think we all want to see our communities get stronger, and a foundational belief I have, Aaron, is that if our communities are comprised of those who are wealthy and privileged and those who are poor and marginalized, it's just never a good equation for anyone. Actually, I think if we can build more relationships across difference, I think it benefits our entire society. And on economic levels, like for example, the extent that we can help people have access to information about diabetes and
Mm,
access to exercise, and they're less likely to go to the emergency room and be at the extreme level of sickness when it comes to diabetes, that society is going to bear that burden, right? So it's really in everyone's best interest to ensure that everyone has access to healthcare. And I we don't need to get off on too much of a tangent here about COVID, but I think one of the things that we saw at ACC was is that COVID illuminated the extreme inequities in access to healthcare, because I know for my husband and I, it's like we had very few friends of our white friends who got COVID, at least early in the pandemic. And at ACC, almost 100% of families all got
wow.
COVID and were hospitalized and very, very sick. So poor Latino families were decimated and devastated by COVID, and I think because they had to get on buses, they had to go to work when the rest of us could work at home, but also because their baseline health is just not as good as ours, because they have diabetes, or maybe they have cardiovascular disease, at some basic level, and they're not even aware of it because they don't have access to healthcare. And so I think to the extent that we can help everyone have access to things like healthcare and education, I think it benefits our society economically, because we're not carrying the burden of what's placed on our hospitals. But also, I think in other ways, I mean, if everyone's thriving, then I think it brings us all up. So, and then, there's that other level that I talked about that I experience, is that
Mm.
I think when we care about one another and connect with one another, it fills our hearts up in ways that you can't imagine, but it makes us happier. So.
Very well said. Thank you. And that was like going to be my next question, is kind of how has COVID changed things? That's something that I always like to ask people. How have things changed in the last year and a half? And you've already covered that, but you mentioned getting on buses and trains and so forth, and not being able to work at home. And somebody had said recently, I used the term that I hadn't heard up until recently, was the laptop class.
Hmm.
And you get the privilege to work from home, I guess. And although there is a great benefit to being in the office and being around other people, but and then thinking back about last year, and I commute 45 minutes downtown to downtown Denver every day. That was
Mhm.
what I was doing before, doing some more of that now. But as COVID was starting to break out in earnest here in the U.S., my car had broken down. I needed to take it to the shop, get some major repairs, and I was taking the light rail. I can't remember if it was for a week or 2 weeks. I think it was 2 weeks. And just surrounded by people, and we weren't wearing masks yet at that point in time. Like,
Hmm.
it's really shocking that I didn't get it. Another person in our household did get it at that time, but not me. So anyways, just thinking about that experience as you were sharing that, because it is very different. So
Yeah, and I think,
yeah.
along with that too, it's like, so people work jobs that don't allow them to work from home, but then if they got COVID, then they were at risk of losing their job. And
Sure.
one of the services that we started doing, actually, this is, I think, interesting to share, but, ACC, we never did emergency services because we never wanted to treat people as needy, and we didn't ever want to give any handouts. And so, but during the pandemic, we did start offering emergency services, and we received some funds so we could help pay people's rent. And
Mm,
we helped hundreds and hundreds, I think, 700 families or something, pay their rent. And But I also, what I really want to be sure to say here is that we should all be proud as Coloradans, because our governor, I'm sure with support from other people, made a decision to allocate some of the pandemic relief funds to any Coloradan who needed rental help, and they didn't have to prove legal status. They didn't have to prove anything, and I'm proud of that Colorado showed compassion. The Colorado state government showed compassion, and so we had large numbers of families who work in the service sector and lost their
Mm,
job. They worked in the
sure.
restaurant, they lost their job, and
Wow.
they were going to be homeless with 3 or 4 kids. Many of our families live 2 or 3 families in a single household, like 3-bedroom house with 2 families, and they were going to lose their homes and be on the street. And we got money from a private donor, a very generous private donor, as well as the state of Colorado, to help cover people's rent. So I'm proud that Colorado is one of the few state governments that said, you know what, we're going to put political battles aside, and we're not going to, we're going to think about human beings right now, and children and whole
Hmm.
families, and immigration issue aside, we're going to put that aside. And regardless of your immigration status, we're going to treat you as a human being. And I will forever be proud of Colorado for that.
That's great. So and that touches along another question that I always love to ask people. Maybe you already answered it. Then I guess is what makes Colorado so great? And I think we got your answer right there.
Mm-hmm.
So one more question here, then I guess is uh, something that I always love to ask people as well, just because I'm a parent, have 4 kids, and always trying to determine, how do we approach certain conversations with our kids when topics come up, or help out friends that are in my community, in my network, as they talk about things. So I guess for you, what would your advice be when the topic of immigration, and that's broad, so take it wherever you want, but when the topic of immigration comes up, in your eyes, what would you recommend parents talk with their children about? And how do they
Mm-hmm.
approach that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you asking that, and I think it's sort of similar to other conversations about people in poverty, or people who are, what would teach our kids about people who are different than us, whether it's a different race or disability status. But I think talk very explicitly with our children and teach them to be kind towards all people, and to see value in all people. And um, I think one thing, Aaron, I guess I'm just going to say this explicitly too, in case there's anyone who could hear this, but I think it's sometimes people refer to immigrants in our midst who aren't fortunate to have legal status as illegals. And I beg us to never use that word, and never teach our children to refer to a human being as illegal. And I mean, I sometimes go through a stop sign, after I don't wait the full 3 seconds, and so I've done an illegal act, but I'm not an illegal human being, and so I guess to just catch ourselves,
Right.
to refer to human beings in dignified ways. And then I think the other conversation with our children is just to do our best to help raise their awareness of the differences of how other people live. And, so for example, just to perhaps share with our children when we're having a nice meal, or there's heat on in the house in the winter, and, just to help explain to our children that children in other parts of the country don't have many of these same things. Like, I was talking with families last night, and they were saying that their families in Mexico don't even have water every day of the
Mm,
week. They have water like 2 days out of the 7 or something. So, to help our children understand that the immigrants who are here is because dad couldn't find work, he couldn't feed his children, he couldn't provide health care for them, and that those parents love their children just like you love your children, and you want a better life for them. And then from there, just to kind of like you're trying to do, Aaron, is point out the positive. Like, well, immigrants work so hard, and they don't get paid as much as I do, but they still work so hard,
Hmm.
and because they love their children like I do, and I think just if we model that for our children, what you're doing with this podcast is let's see the good in one another, and if we model that for our children, but then I think to be explicit as well and name that, that there's good in all human beings, and our society and our community, we're going to be better off if we see good in each other. And but I think for children also to just help them understand. I know it's going to be hard for children to really get it,
Yeah.
but like in my family growing up, actually during Lent, we used to do the rice bowl thing, like one day a week, all we had was rice and beans for dinner. I don't know if that made much of an impact, but it's sort of like as, as much a gesture, I suppose, as a parent can make. But I give my parents credit for trying to help us understand in a simple way that this is what some people's dinner is like every single day. And maybe it's their only meal of the day. And so those are just some thoughts.
That's great. Thank you. Is there anything that I've not asked that I should have, or anything more that you want to share that we've not gotten to?
I think we've
Yeah.
covered a lot. I think
Covered
everything
most of
that
the ground. Okay.
yeah.
So I guess since I always like to ask people about what they like about Colorado, and you, like I said, you already covered that ground. But let me ask you a little similar question, a little different way. So when you were in Colorado, when you first moved to this state several years ago, how have you seen our state change, not just economically in the growth, but maybe with for people and their attitudes or the culture of Colorado, any way you want to answer that. But how have you seen our state change, say over the last 30 years, from when you came here before for work? So I think that's something that a lot of people who are new to Colorado or relatively new to our state don't necessarily understand what it was like, you know, 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually, it's worth telling you is that when I was in high school, I was a Girl Scout, and it
Okay.
was a huge part of my life actually because I grew up poor, working class poor, and Girl Scouting was a way that I had access to resources actually, and I came out in my junior year of high school
Okay.
for a National Girl Scout convention to Colorado, and I got in a Greyhound bus and had a tour of the mountains. And I said, someday I want to go live in Colorado. So when I was applying to do full time volunteer work, I purposely picked Colorado because I dreamed about coming to Colorado. So, and I've never left since actually, except to do work in Latin America or go to grad school. Um, so I guess in one level, I mean, everything I've always loved about Colorado is still true. Is that that people like being outdoors and they like being active, and they are the majority of people have instincts towards a healthy life, and actually kind of not unlike some of the themes I've already brought up is that I notice that when I'm out, on a bike ride or a run or something, and I say hello to people, people are generally happy, so they're outdoors and they're exercising and they're just in a better mood. And
Right.
so I think that's a wonderful part of Colorado. I think one thing I would say is that Colorado is so wonderful. Too many people are moving here though, because
The secret's
the one
gotten
thing I
out.
don't like is that there's a lot more traffic now than there used to be. So I want people to come visit Colorado, but not move here. Um, but um, but I do love actually. I used to live in Denver, and then also in Aurora. It's a very diverse community, which
Hmm.
I love because that's not unlike the advice I'm giving to us is be in relationship with people across difference. And I lived in the Sunnyside neighborhood in Denver, and that was a very racially and economically diverse neighborhood. And I think lots of Denver is that. Aurora is definitely that, and so I think there are a lot of opportunities to mix in a really nice way with people of different backgrounds, and at least in the urban areas in Colorado,
Yeah.
um, and I also love that there are a lot of immigrants here in Colorado, and I think they make our state a better place. So
Absolutely. Good. Okay. And you touched on you're very active, triathlete. Uh, and do a lot of biking still. So the outdoors of Colorado obviously very important to you in getting out. So let me ask you just a few questions in that I just kind of popcorn questions that I love to ask people. When you go up into the mountains, do you like to camp in a tent? Do you prefer like an RV or stay in a hotel?
Yeah, well, actually, we're lucky. We live in Golden, so we live in the
So,
foothills. So I rode my bike in the mountains just today. I ride out the front door and I'm in the mountains. So, but when I first moved here, I camped every weekend actually, and I lately I
mm,
like to backpack more than camp because the car camping people listen to the loud radio, So, um,
yes.
so I but mostly, we just ride our bikes for the day, and then if we're so, but and I went actually when I was changing between leaving my job at ACC and before starting a new job, I went on a backpacking trip for 4 days, and that was wonderful. So, um,
Where did you go?
Rocky Mountain National Park, which
Okay,
is
yeah,
a wonderful resource.
that's right.
So,
So what's your favorite place to go in the mountains?
um, I don't have
Yeah,
necessarily. I
okay.
mean, so I have favorite bike rides, like Left Hand Canyon and Boulder, and but right out our back door here, Golden Gate Canyon and Lookout
Mm,
Mountain are some of my favorite places. But and then my husband has a motorcycle, and we ride our motorcycle. So I love riding our motorcycle out near Gunnison and Carbondale and Telluride and those places too. So.
cool. Okay. And then one other kind of quirky question I like to ask people is, can you name a movie that has been filmed in Colorado?
Um, I think actually there's a movie that was filmed near Telluride, but I'm spacing out the name. But
Oh,
we've stayed in an Airbnb in the town right near there. So,
okay. Okay. I'll have to look it up. All right. Fair
but I
enough.
have it in my mind, but
Yeah,
I can't
okay.
remember the name. So,
Very good. Um, Yeah, usually The Shining, which of course here we're at Halloween time, that's what people generally say. I think
mm-hmm.
that's what, the Stanley up in Estes Park is where people's minds go to. So, um, in fact, I might watch that tonight or tomorrow, uh, as well with my son. So we'll see. We'll see. Since it's Halloween weekend,
Yeah, go
so
for
good. Good. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk through all of this with you. Finally, get the opportunity that I missed out on because of my own introvertedness a few months ago when I first bumped into you. So, I appreciate the opportunity to talk. Is there anything else that you want to share before we wrap up?
it. I think it's
Yeah.
been wonderful. So yeah, so just appreciate your interest, Darren, and I guess I suppose maybe what I, would say is just maybe all be inspired by your example and find ways to be kind to one another and see common interests and I had an experience the other day. I was riding my bike up Bear Creek Canyon
Mm,
and I stopped in a little store up in Kittredge and I wanted to buy a snack um, I went to pay for my bag of peanuts and I realized that my little purse that I have in the back of my bike was empty. Like I, forgot to replenish the money. And so I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I put down the peanuts and started walking away. And then this stranger, a complete stranger, walked
mm,
up and said to the cashier, he said, "How much is it?" And even before the cashier answered, he said, "I'll pay for that." And I was really moved. I actually almost started crying, and I touched the man gently on the arm and said, "Thank you for that human kindness." And when I went out, I was pleased that I thought to myself, you know what? I don't even care what president he voted for in the last election.
right.
Like and I guess I just want all of us to just try and find common goodness in each other and think less about what political party we're aligned with, and in fact, actually try and disentangle ourselves from some of those things and just make efforts to see goodness in each other and bring out goodness in each other and care for one another. And I think we'll all be happier and probably better able to see common goals we have around many things like healthcare and immigration and education.
Yeah.
I think probably the things that we value in common are probably much greater than we realize. So thank you for your inspiration, and I want to echo that and encourage all of us to be inspired in those ways.
Well, I appreciate that, and let me return the favor. And I appreciate you being an inspiration and finally getting the chance to have you on and share your story. I love politics. I've worked in politics around public policy, and it's something that I just can't seem to give up, even though I've tried. Maybe there's a 12-step program out there somewhere where I can go through it and finally give up the habit. But I love talking politics. Anybody that knows me knows that. But I love having other conversations as well. But I think we too often get stuck in this rut of talking about politics and wrapping everything around that. Everything seems to become political these days, even for a political junkie like me and my friends. So but through this channel, my goal to have separate conversations and go in a different direction, and love to have policy discussions, in other venues and opportunities, but not through this. But to be able to hear from you and your passion and the work that you're doing in helping immigrants here in the U.S., your history in working down in Central America and El Salvador and in Mexico. I appreciate that because I don't get the opportunity to talk to folks a lot about that sort of thing. So, but just meeting people where they're at, where the human needs are, and thank you for your work here in Colorado, in our community, in helping people where they're at. And my goal is to connect with more people such as yourself and highlight leaders like yourself who are doing that work. And let's have a different type of conversation, but one that's valuable like that. So keep up the work. I know you're transitioning into a new role, and love to reconnect with you down the road potentially and hear more about that. But for today, I think we covered a lot of ground and really appreciate
Great.
that. So
Okay.
thank you much. So I will let you drop off here, and I'm going to wrap up, and I'll follow up with you a little later.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Robin, thank
Okay.
you. Dr. Robin
Thanks
Waterman,
again.
thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
All right, folks, thank you for tuning in, taking the opportunity to hang out for a few minutes. I hope that you found some value in our conversation and what Dr. Robin Waterman had to say. She's founder of a community nonprofit organization in Aurora called Aurora Community Connection. Although she's no longer with that organization, she's in transition. But just to hear about the work that she was able to do through early on in her career, talking about the work that she was doing, serving the needs of people down in Central America. Like I said, as I started out, I missed the opportunity to have this conversation with Robin at a work event a few months ago when I bumped into her, because we met over a food line. I didn't want to take that moment and have awkward small talk conversations, and I was just more interested in getting back to my table, and really, I missed that opportunity. But once I learned about the work that she's been doing in her leadership in our state, I think, that's somebody that I want to have on, somebody I want to have a discussion with, and really, some insightful conversation with her and to get her perspective on helping people, specifically immigrants in our community, in the work that she was doing in Aurora and the greater Aurora area. So would love your feedback, to hear what you have to say about that, and the work that she's been doing helping people, and the organization that she created. I think she's a real leader in her state, and appreciate her giving me time, being generous with her time to come on. So I will wrap up with there. I'm Aaron Johnson, Mile High Live. This is my social channel, my stream to share what is going on in Colorado with people who are doing hard work, as I say, to elevate Colorado, people who are rolling up their sleeves, doing the hard work in our community to help make this state the great place that it is. So I've got some more great interviews and chats coming up here in the near future. So please, subscribe, tune in, and hang out. And would love your questions and comments as well. Love your feedback, and know what you like, and if there's anybody else that you would love to hear from through this channel. So with that, I'm signing off. Thank you for tuning in, and that's what's good in Colorado.